Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are here with Rob Bookman, partner, Pisetsky and Bookman, and counsel for the New York City Hospitality Alliance.
Hey, Rob, it's great to see you, and thank you for taking the time from your schedule to be with me today. We're excited to have you and really get your insights. You've been a veteran of nightlife in New York City for many years, and obviously this past 18 months has been quite challenging for the city of New York, both because you were at the epicenter of the outbreak initially and really have become a leader in recovery. So why don't you give me a brief background on your history and how you got into doing the work that you're doing and what it is that your primary role is in the hospitality and nightlife?
Sure. I mean, something happened in the last 18 months. As you well know, I'm an attorney in a private practice, and I used to be with the city government in the agency that regulated nightlife, regulated what we used to call cabarets. And when I went into private practice, I naturally went into that area and secured the licenses for some of the early, clubs in New York, Peter Gation's clubs and others. That ultimately morphed into organizing the first trade association, which the New York Nightlife Association, which did best practices, which did the first nightlife economic impact study. We were really at the forefront of a lot of that, in New York. And ultimately that kept growing that organization from dance clubs to all nightlife to 7 years ago, we formed the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which is our current group, which really is an alliance of all types of, food and beverage operations, open at night in New York, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, destination hotels, as well as many of the corporate businesses that rely on a vibrant nightlife all together in one alliance. So that's what I've been doing, for 30 some odd years now, not only representing individual mom and pops, as they deal with government and getting their licensing, but dealing with from 30,000 feet, dealing with the industry issues, whether it be city or state, and now because of COVID, federal issues as well.
And New York City has always been kind of the epicenter of trends in nightlife. I know when I managed a music venue and disco back in the early 70s, we'd go to Manhattan because that's always where you got the latest trends in music and dance and dining and restaurants and things that were happening. But prior to COVID, I know that there were a lot of changes that were happening. New York City and Manhattan obviously was building more residential. You saw the shift to Brooklyn. A lot of these things were changing before COVID, creating both opportunities and pressure for businesses. What did you see happening before COVID, and what were the challenges from the hospitality? I mean, obviously your Nightlife Association was formed and the Hospitality Alliance was formed because there were things that your members wanted to work on, to do, to change policies, perhaps because there were things that were happening externally. So what were the opportunities and challenges?
Well, we had our challenge. It was actually positive time in many ways, the years prior to COVID. The number of establishments in New York City was increasing. Some feel increasing too dramatically, but it was increasing very democratically. It wasn't a Manhattan-centric industry any longer. There was increasing, late night music and dance, throughout the city. What we were seeing was that there was a more progressive acceptance of the industry because of this democratization of it, and that our laws which were ancient, our zoning laws, our cabaret dance laws were ancient, and a lot of these places operating in the other boroughs were not operating legally. So there was a groundswell to liberalize the laws, and the city council joined that. So prior to COVID, we got a law passed repealing the cabaret dance law, although not addressing the underlying safety or zoning laws, but nevertheless, one less nuisance enforcement, something we never would have anticipated being able to do 30 years ago when I got started, representing, here in New York City. And we also got the nightlife office established, which was a major, step forward, something we've been advocating for 25 years. And it was, while initially not something that this mayor asked for, the city council, demanded it and passed it. It's something that he adopted very much. And we were very fortunate in that the first person in charge of that office was someone who came from our world, who had not only been a nightclub owner, but had been on the executive committee of one of the early New York Nightlife Association groups. So things were pretty good. I mean, we were institutionalizing a lot of the communication issues that you've always stressed, that RHI has always stressed through the Office of Nightlife. The council also passed a required nightlife advisory board, which I was appointed to, and our executive director, Andrew Ridgey, was appointed to, with a lot of different stakeholders. And we were working on a series of recommendations that the Office of Nightlife couldn't recommend, necessarily, but that the stakeholders could. And then COVID happened. And everything changed. Nightlife shut down, restaurants shut down, bars shut down.
Let me ask, just to clarify, for people who are not totally familiar with New York City, it really is almost a city of neighborhoods, but right, on a much larger scale. So prior to COVID, obviously, Manhattan was kind of the epicenter of a lot of nightlife and the venues that had the dance clubs. Although maybe you can explain the cabaret law, which I think limited opportunities for dance.
The neighborhoods that traditionally had dance clubs, in Manhattan, were priced out with high-end residential. So whether it be the Flatiron District or Tribeca or Soho, or the West Village or West Chelsea, all these neighborhoods got priced out with, expensive condominiums. And I think at the same time, there was I don't know if it was a chicken or the egg, but at the same time, people were moving more towards eating and drinking and bar scenes, not the large dance club scenes. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of dancing going on in smaller locations, in neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in neighborhoods in Queens, that in northern Manhattan, where ethnic neighborhoods where previously it wasn't allowed, and our zoning laws were very restrictive, where an eating and drinking a place could allow for dancing was very ancient idea that it had to be away from residential, because dance club, the zoning laws felt was much more intrusive than a bar. Mm-hmm. And so we had lots of bars that were small dance clubs, but not legal ones. And so the movement was towards, making them legal. And that movement continues today. The new mayor, the new guy who's going to be mayor of New York, he is fully behind liberalizing the zoning laws as well, so that they won't even need not only do they not need a cabaret license anymore, but that neighborhood bars below a certain number of people, number to be determined, let's say 200, whatever, will be allowed to have dancing, and be completely legal.
It reminds me of back in the day, in the early 70s, when you had that whole disco scene with the large venues and everything. But then as my generation got older, the baby boom generation, and began to settle down, it was no longer that singles crowd. That's when you had what was called the fern bars, the places that you would go and you'd eat, like the Bennigans and the TGI Fridays and those other places. And so what I hear you saying is essentially it was similar, and we've heard this in other cities that we've worked with, that big box dance club was really challenged even before COVID in the early 2000s, 2010s, because of the shift of the demographics. The millennials were coming of age, they were settling down, they were starting families, and so
all that. And plus, from a pure real estate perspective, there wasn't large places that you could afford, empty large places anymore. Those places had been gentrified. So it definitely pushed to the other boroughs where there still were more large, empty old warehouses, for example, that could be converted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So COVID happened, like you said, everything shut down. And then there was a lot of liberalization of policy that really helped to support the venues staying open with the expanded outdoor seating or the alcohol
Correct.
to go and the take out delivery. And all of these things created a new dynamic in the city. And in some cases, it was just some people would see rushed into place, and some saw it as an opening of opportunity. So, what do you think happened during those first, 6 months or 9 months of that transition that today are lessons learned that could be applicable for the future? And where do you see some of those changes being pulled back?
Well, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, we didn't let a good pandemic go to waste.
Mhm.
And while many politicians prior to COVID were beginning to actually talk about the importance of small business in general, to the health of the city, the hospitality industry in particular, COVID really made them start to walk the walk. And that's where a well-established trade association like we have in New York City, the Hospitality Alliance, came into play, where the Office of Nightlife could not advocate for law changes as well, because they are part of the administration. So it was clear right away that this industry was being particularly hard hit. We were the first ones being, restricted, and we were the last ones being open. So we, as you mentioned, we were able to work with both the mayor and the city council, who were both very open, and to a certain extent the governor, within the framework of public safety, and everybody was feeling their way through what all that meant. Some major temporary liberalizations, like you mentioned. We went from 1,500 licensed sidewalk cafes in New York to over 11,000 establishments having emergency outdoor seating. That outdoor seating included, for the first time ever, roadside seating, not just sidewalk cafes up against the building of the restaurant. We had alcohol to go with for deliveries, with food orders. We got the outrageous third-party fees from the Grubhubs of the world, those capped at 5%, so that they would not get a windfall, because we were being asked to help feed the city when everybody was closed, and delivery and takeout was part of the way to feed the city. And we couldn't afford to do that if we were paying 25-30% to Grubhub for every order they transmitted. So we got the council to do that. We got the council and the mayor to pass a law prohibiting landlords from enforcing personal guarantees against individuals who guaranteed the rent in their lease as long as they were in possession of the premises, because while they were technically in possession, the government had effectively shut them down. So these are a whole series of things that we were able to get done. Some, as you say, were temporary, which have ended now, but some are in some form are going to be permanent. So the caps on the third-party deliveries we have passed in New York as a permanent. They're suing, but we got it passed as permanent, as well as many other reforms against them. I don't know, we could have gotten all of that done prior to COVID, to tell you the truth. Sharing of customer data, phone number information, all that kind of stuff. The outdoor dining, we are working with all the parties now and coming up with what a new permanent program will look like, but it is going to be much more liberal than the old sidewalk cafe law. More restrictive than the emergency, but that's fine. But everybody's already agreeing that some form of roadside dining should be included. We got a lot of allies that we didn't know we had with the anti-car groups who felt that the city should do more creative things with their space than park cars, And so a lot of them are very happy with the concept of having dining in some of those streets. Now, it may not be these sheds. It may just be tables and chairs and umbrellas, and it might be seasonal. But that's something we never would have imagined that we would be discussing, having roadside dining, as a permanent part of the city.
So these are all positive changes. How have residents, because I know prior to COVID, part of what you had said, when the residents moved in, there were challenges of either adding new nightlife within the residential area, or residents put a lot of pressure on those venues that existed. Has these expanded outdoor dining precipitated issues around sound or litter or trash that you're working on in this new plan?
Yes, and all of the above. And some of the complaints are legitimate. The very nature of the emergency required a quick down and dirty emergency program that anybody can get approved online. Most people try to comply. Not everybody does. There aren't rules and regulations for a lot of this stuff. So yes, we are working on all of that. Hours of limitations, noise, garbage, congestion, clearances, all of that needs to be part of the new, more liberal permanent program.
The large number of restaurants that haven't been able to access some of the federal funds, or it hasn't been adequate for them to sustain their businesses. And so you see, at least a certain percentage of closures, and then property owners sitting with a vacant, fully equipped restaurant. You mentioned to me that this is actually creating a kind of an opportunity that wouldn't have existed before because, like you said, of the high real estate value and the point of entry of opening up a restaurant. The cost of investment exceeded what most entrepreneurs could tap into.
That's absolutely correct. Those were two big challenges we had before COVID, that real estate prices were ridiculously high, and the cost of entry into the business was ridiculously high, because there were only two ways to get into the business. You either had to buy out an existing successful restaurant, which was not going to be cheap, or you had to convert a place from scratch, take a clothing store and convert it into a restaurant or bar, which requires lengthy amounts of and expensive applications, building department permits, inspections. That was a big problem. COVID actually created, as you said, an opportunity. We are seeing in our office on a weekly basis young entrepreneurs who are not deep-pocketed, or often women and minority entrepreneurs who have a once-in-a-generational opportunity now to get into the industry, because neither one of those two barriers particularly exists now. We don't know the exact number, probably at least 1,000, maybe as many as 2,000 fully vacant, fully built out restaurants and bars that landlords are desperate to get tenants for. They're offering 6 months free rent. They're offering a rent which is generally around 25% less than the prior tenant was paying, and it's fully built out. Our office is really busy because of that, because there is, and as a matter of fact, it's created a problem. It's a great opportunity, but the problem is that in New York City, it takes 4 to 6 months to get a liquor license. The only way to get a temporary while your application was pending is if you were buying out Joe's Diner that is currently open and operating, and you're just switching over to your operation. But since there is no way to get a temporary when you're taking a vacant previously licensed space, so we are actually working with the new governor and the state legislature to get us some help here, because we have hundreds and hundreds of places that want to open now. Start hiring people, start paying taxes, but they got to wait 4 to 6 months to get a liquor license. So every opportunity creates a problem, and we're working on all that as well. And that is where things like that is where the Office of Nightlife also is very helpful in lobbying the state to explain what we need here in New York City.
Well, that was going to be my final question, because moving forward, if we were to project, in fact, we're supposed to bring our summit to New York City in 2023, so it's about 18 months from now. And you have this Organized Hospitality Alliance, and you have the Office of Nightlife and the Advisory Board, this kind of triangle of resources for the city. If you were to say, for those cities that are facing similar not only opportunities, but challenges in getting some of these vacant spaces revitalized, and really, revitalizing and reimagining the nightlife of the city. How do these three different groups work together? What do you think will be 18 months from now as a result of having this kind of a structure?
I think they can work together very well. We are working very well together in New York City. I do think there's a need for all of them, however. We are having a new mayor come in January, and we're hoping, and this will be the first change in administration since we had an Office of Nightlife. So we are hoping that the new mayor is committed to it, and actually committed to expanding its staff, because really started with a very skeletal staff. It can only do a portion of what it needs to be doing. So we will see. But because we have these other two things, because we have this advisory board and we have the Hospitality Alliance, we have natural advocates for that. But we each serve a somewhat different role. The advisory board has all kinds of stakeholders, community people as well. So it creates, a variety of balanced proposals. The Hospitality Alliance is an advocacy group. And sometimes the Office of Nightlife, since it works for the mayor, has to hold back from a certain amount of advocacy. They could not get involved, for example, on their own advocating for capping the fees of third-party delivery companies. That's something that had to come, organically from the industry. So there's a need for each. One complements the other, if done well. And I think we wouldn't have had an Office of Nightlife in New York if we didn't have, a trade association all these years pushing for it.
Well, this has been great, Rob. It's always been fascinating to listen to you and get your perspectives. And I appreciate you taking the time today. And I hope that when we come to New York City in 2023, we'll be able to really experience a vibrant nighttime economy.